Welcome to another exciting mystery solving video. In this one, we are going to solve the mystery of two underwater features found. One is off the coast of India, nearest to Dwarka, which is two parallel beams. And if you look at Yonaguni off the coast of Japan, this one, now obviously I cannot zoom in and show you a top view because it's underwater. However, there are some images people have taken. So what is this? Why is it a large block or stone dumped into the sea? So people like to take images of themselves, demonstrating at how dwarfed we are in size in comparison to these huge steps that have been cut out into this block. So what is causing this theme of greatness and largeness? Why is it so big? Somebody has done us this diagram, so we got some measurements, which is very useful. With those measurements, we can calculate an outer bounding box volume, which is 156,000 cubic meters. And if you include all the steps and the cutouts, we get to 120,000 cubic meters. So Dwarka basically looks like this. These are fake images I've had to create because I cannot find an image of this. So basically what we have here are two parallel beams in an easterly direction, approximately 10 meters long, and it's separated with a gap and a little circle in the middle. We also have these anchors that have been found in the sea. Many of these stone anchors. In Australia, there is also this curved rock wall, which I have added to the study, and you'll see why when we get there. So why is there this theme of largeness and greatness and bigness? What does it have to do with a block? So we have these two ideas here of a large block and in Dwarka, two parallel beams. So what story does this remind you of? Now, in regards to the largeness, the block, if you go to ancient Egypt, you'll see that everything is large and big, and great and tall, much greater than us. Now, why is that? I'll tell you why that is. Why does Egypt have this theme? Now, when Moses confronted the evil Pharaoh and told him to release God's people, what did the Pharaoh respond? He said, no. I am higher on the list. Your God and you are so low down on the list, I've never even heard of you. In other words, what he's saying here, what he's implying is that he is greater. The Pharaoh responds by saying, no, because I am greater. I am higher. I am taller than you. And for your insolence, the Israelites will from now on fetch their own straw to make brick. Now, we all know the story of how Moses then came along with the plagues, and God cast these 10 plagues on the evil Pharaoh and the Egyptians because he refused to release the Israelites or God's people from slavery and captivity. So, however, God was with the Israelites. And you know the story of how Moses parted the sea. The sea was parted, the people crossed, and then what happened? After they crossed, the Pharaoh gave chase with chariots and basically tried to set them up into a trap. So they entered the dry land across the sea, chasing the Israelites. And what happened? The sea collapsed on them. Doof! And all Egyptians got washed away like a sunken stone. Glug, glug. And they were all at the bottom of the sea. So basically we have Dwarka, which represents the parting of the sea, and Yonaguni is the giant stone, sunken stone. These are the two key passages where Moses stretches out his hand and raises his rod. The Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind. And the Yonaguni stone comes down to this passage where it speaks of the depth that covered them. They sank into the bottom as a stone. The Egyptians that chased the Israelites ended up sinking like stone. Now, to prove this, we need to take some measurements between the sites. For the purpose of the study, I have taken measurements between Yonaguni and Dwarka, and obviously Yonaguni and the North and South Pole, Yonaguni and the Mount Sinai, because this is where Moses received the law, Yonaguni and Chula, because why not? It's another added part of the journey. If you haven't seen the video, it's representing the last stage of the Israelite wilderness journey. and the takeover of Jericho. Yonaguni and Easter Island. Easter Island represents the manna and the law being received and the stone tablets. Then we have Dwarka with all the same measurements. Now, for the purpose of the actual place where Moses parted the sea. So if we come out here, okay. Now, where did Moses actually part the sea? For the purpose of the study, I've taken two key locations where it was believed to have happened. Now, this area here is Great Bitter, which, because of the study and my calculations, it proves why this is probably the strongest location. You'll see why later on in the study. So we got Great Bitter, which is this one, and we also got Belah, which is up here somewhere. So we have taken both these locations. Now back then, in the time of Moses, this channel did not look so nice and neat. This is new. This is new flow for the sea to enter, but back then it did not look like this. There was certainly a lot more water. You can see how the measurements are very close. For the purpose of the study, I've also included Yonaguni and Dwarka to Yonaguni, because again in the previous video I demonstrated how the gas in the brush at Yonaguni in eastern Turkey and its constant burning of the bushes represents the burning bush. The distance between the curved wall in Australia, Yonaguni and Dwarka, you'll see how 22273 is a big part of the Moses story. If we take a look between Yonaguni and Mount Sinai, do you see how this straight distance between Yonaguni and Mount Sinai is exactly 8,003 kilometers. And the inner angle at the center of the earth is 77 degrees. Now, when Moses confronted the evil Pharaoh, he was 80 years old. And that is captured in Exodus 7:7. So already you can see the writing is on the wall. But we're going to look at all these different measurements. You can see here there's a 130-degree angle between Dwarka and Yonaguni as a supplementary angle. Now, 130 is Mount Sinai in Hebrew, and 130 I found also has a relationship with the horse and its rider and the sinking and the sea reopens. So there is just so many measurements here that you'll find lines up perfectly with the Bible story. But these are just demonstrating here some of the measurements and the diagrams nice and big so you can see them first. You see this core distance between Yonaguni and the South Pole is 10713 kilometers. Now, what have we learnt in the other studies about the number 107? 107 is the beast's number. However, here we can look at it like the wrong way. 107 is the wrong way, 106 is the right way. Nice and big, Yonaguni and Chula. We got Yonaguni and Easter Island. Then we got Dwarka's co-latitude, and Combat is another area very close to Dwarka, which I included just to ensure I have got my location perfectly correct. But you'll see why I have. Cast your mind on the brick bondage before the sea journey. So the Israelites have been enslaved for 400 years and they forced to do manual labor by the evil Pharaoh, otherwise they would be put to death. This Pharaoh was considered to be the most evil person in the whole Bible. The block width is 40 meters. So yes, Moses spent 40 days and 40 nights on Mount Sinai. However, 40 meters is also 87 common cubits, and 87 is brick, the Hebrew word for brick, and that matches with the brick that in Exodus 5:7, where it speaks of the Israelites having to be forced to make brick. And 400 could also be considered the 400 years in captivity. Now, the Bible starts by saying 400, and then when it gets later on, it extends it to 430. Now, I've done a whole study behind this and I can explain it, trying not to get too difficult. However, 430 can be found in several measurements. Between Dwarka and Yonaguni, there is a half angle of 0.430 rads. Yonaguni and Dwarka, the run distance, ends up with a 430. The Chula to Yonaguni surplus is 4300 royal cubits, and there is a surplus window of 4,304 miles. So 430 comes up in the distance measurements between the sites quite regularly. And there it is captured 430 years in Exodus 12:40. If we take Yonaguni's latitude position of 24.4 degrees, and we digit sum it, we get to 15. And there in Numbers 33:3, there was a 15th day of departure, which is after the 14th, after Passover. And there it's captured on the 15th day of the first month. We also have a 28 cubit measurement, which relates to the curtains around the tabernacle. So the curtains shall be 8 and 20 cubits. The Pharaoh commanded 600 chariots chase the Israelites through the water. However, they got stuck in the mud. Now, 6,000 square meters is the surface area of the block at Yonaguni, which is 150 times 40 is 6,000 square meters. There is also 60 myriads, where myriads, or 600,000 people that Moses rescued from Egypt. And that's captured 600, 6,000, 600,000. We also have other measurements that bring us to 60 and 120. So it's just further support and measurements found between the poles and Great Bitter, the actual location where Moses parted the sea. So although it's not measuring Yonaguni, I thought I'd just include this for interest's sake. Now, once Moses, after the 10th plague, the evil Pharaoh lets the people go. And as they make their journey towards the sea and the promised land, they have this night watch. So basically on earth, Mount Sinai, Egypt, and Yonaguni, if we take these measurements, now Moses, as I said, was 80 years old when he confronts the Pharaoh. Now, according to my research, when Moses is exiled, it was Thutmose III that did that to Moses. Then 40 years later, Moses returns and confronts Amenhotep II. So Amenhotep II, he is the evil Pharaoh mostly in the Moses sea parting story and the 10 plagues. Thutmose IV that took over from Amenhotep II is not his first son, it's his second son. So that does align with the story of the 10th plague and the taking of his first son, because he is the second son. Also, today they believe they've found his body, and with some modern day research, they've checked his body, his bones, and found that he did suffer from severe skin ailments, skin problems like boils, which was 6th plague. So there are two pieces of evidence that does support this. Yeah, the straight line chord between Yonaguni and Mount Sinai is exactly 8,000 and 3.2. Now, in Peter 3:2, there it speaks of 8 were saved through water. So here it speaks of the first water incident, which was Noah. Okay, later on, so there's 2 water incidents, the Great Flood and the parting of the sea, and there are 2 ark stories with Noah's Ark and then the Ark of the Covenant. So what I found here, this exact angle is 77.82. Now 7782 is trumpet, and they did sound trumpets along with the Ark of the Covenant. Trumpet's a big part of the Ark of the Covenant story. Now we also calculate in ark minutes. I get 4669. Now 4669, the Hebrew number, is opening or entrance. And when the sea was parted, that was an opening, an entrance. So the idea of the trap at the water, this is where the Pharaoh thinks, he's got the Israelites because they trapped at the water. Now, if you measure the axis at 32 degrees and Mount Sinai at 34, the difference is exactly 1.7 degrees of longitude. If we convert that to arc minutes, we get 102. Now, the Greek number 102 means powerless, or unable, impossible. Now, the Pharaoh, he stated that he's got the Israelites. They are now powerless. And that's captured in Exodus 14:3. Now, with that measurement of 1.7 degrees, it brings us down to, yes, we may say it's the beast number and it's sin. It's every chapter 10 verse 7 in the Bible speaks of the wrong way, the liar and Satan. Now 107 in Exodus, there it speaks of the wrong path. Pharaoh's own servants see Egypt is ruined, but Pharaoh keeps resisting and walks into the sea of judgment. And there it speaks of Egypt is destroyed. The 107 really is it's just the wrong path. Then we have a Yonaguni to meridian of 123 degrees. And if you take the difference of 123 and you minus the 32, which is Egypt and the Red Sea axis, we get 91 or 90.741. 91, if you convert that into a percentage, you got 25.2. 252 is the Greek Strong's number for salty water. And that is passage number 1017 in the book of Genesis. And there it speaks of the Canaanites and the wrong path warning. We also have a measurement of 257. And 257, as we learned from the Tula study, is the Hebrew number for ark, as in Ark of the Covenant. 8,003 kilometers can be converted to 26.26 million feet. I believe it's feet. Now, the Greek number 2626 means flood or deluge, and 90, as we saw in the Easter Island study, means manna. So this slide should have maybe come before the other one. Apologies. So now we have a North Pole Yonaguni Dwarka triangle angle at Dwarka of 76.24 degrees. Now that translates to 1.33 rads. So we got this number of 1330. Now the Greek number 1330 means to go or pass through. And we also have a North Pole chord minus the South Pole chord, which is 3,475 kilometers. 3475 is the Greek number for Moses. If we return to the volume calculation of the block, we have 150 by 40 by 26. And that calculates to 156 million liters or 156,000 cubic meters. If we convert that to ohms, we get 70909. Now 709, Exodus 7:9, this is where God says to Moses, take thy rod. We also have a measurement here of bringing us to G1632, which is pour out. And we have a measurement of in feet. The volume in feet is 5509088. Now 5509 is the Greek term for garment or covering field, to cover or cover the Egyptians with water. The waters covered them. In cubic meters, if you include the cutouts, we get to 120,000 cubic meters. That converts to common cubits, cubed, 1255. And 155, I believe, is the Hebrew number for deluge or depths. Then we have Bala to Dwarka and Easter Island global ring, which sums to 40,030 kilometers. And that the difference is 550 kilometers. Now 550 is wind blow, and Exodus 15:10, there it speaks of thou didst blow with thy wind. That also translates to 342 miles. Now 342 is enmity or hostility, and with the Pharaoh pursuing with hostility. Then we have, if we convert that to feet, we have 1806. So 1806 means to lead out or bring forth. And in royal cubits, 1051, which means royal treasures. And in common cubits, 1204 is command. And Moses commanded the sea to be parted, and God commanded the Israelites to be free. Returning to our measurement of 66, the angle between Yonaguni and the North Pole is 66 degrees. Do you see this angle right here? 65.6 degrees between Yonaguni and the North Pole. 65.6. Now, Psalm 66:6 speaks of, he turned the sea into dry land. They passed through the waters on foot. Come, let us rejoice in him. Let's take a look at this curved rock wall in Australia. So Bala to this rock wall, or the actual place Moses parted the sea, to the wave rock wall in Australia, is almost exactly 120 degrees. Now, Moses was 120 when he died. This wall length is 110 meters and about 15 meters high. So 110 meters converts to rods as 22 rods. Now 22 is the passage in Exodus that speaks of the waters were a wall unto them, and their right hand and their left hand. We also have a gap of 1.1 degrees. So this wall has a wave rock longitude of 118.89, and if you take that difference with 120, we get 1.1 degrees. So 11 backs up and support the 110 idea. So it makes the wall feel part of the measured direction language, not an isolated shape. We have a wave rock latitude of 32.44 degrees. So the North Pole being at 90 degrees plus the 32.44 degrees brings us to 122.44. Now 1224 the Greek number is to cross over, pass through. Then we have a Ballard to Wave Rock Earth-centered angle of 103.42 degrees, and it has a supplementary angle of 76.57. So that could be taken as 77. The Greek number 1224 means to cross over, pass through. So thy way is in the sea, and thy path in the great waters. That's captured in Psalm 77. So let's discuss these stone anchors. So what do we have? We have triangular anchors, we have ring stone, and we have grapnel shapes. So these are the three different shapes that we have. Now, so Dwarka has these stone anchors and underwater maritime setting. So we have these three shapes. We have the triangular, the ring stone, and the grapnel. So what does an anchor do? A stone object made to sink, grip, and hold a vessel in place. So this brings us, the anchors brings us to this thematic prophetic alignment with how the stone objects designed to go down and hold fast. So their forms speak stone, weight, grip, and restraint. So after the sea crossing and the Egyptians all got a little bit soaked and destroyed and sunk like stone, the anchors have a seabed setting, and so the initial zone is about 16 meters in depth. So 15.5, this is where it says the depths have covered them and they sank into the bottom as stone. Exodus 15.10 speaks of they sank as lead in the mighty waters. They shall be as still as stone. So what does it bring us to? It brings us to this Dwarka's anchors are literal stone weights in a sea bottom setting. So they support the collapsed seaside part of the study. Now there's also this pillar between the camp. God had this pillar of light to guide the Israelites. So when we consider the one hole, two hole, three hole, we got one hole, meaning it brings us to the opened way, or one attachment point. Two hole, the two-sided division, the two water walls, and the two camps separated before the cross. Three hole can bring us to a three-stage event: command, opening, and passage, return, and collapse. So we have the opening, the passage, and the return and the collapse. Basically three. So if we try to combine the story, we have the sea as open winds, then we have the wall stands, the enemy enters, the waters return, the stones sink. So the wave rock and the anchors should be read together, not merged into one claim. The wave rock carries the wall dry stone memory. The anchors carry the stone sinking at the bottom memory. But together they support the thesis: the sea opens, becomes a path, and wall returns, leaves the enemy in a stone-like sinking judgment. So we have Yonaguni, the meridian zero rotation, brings us to 49.845 degrees east. So if we calculate the reverse of 360 minus that is 310, exactly to Exodus 3:10. Come now, therefore, I will send thee unto Pharaoh. This is Moses' commissioning stage, and the burning of the bush encounter becomes a mission before the sea miracle. We have a central angle of a percent of semicircle, which brings us to 62 degrees divided by 180 is 34%. So Exodus 3:4, this is where God called unto him out of the midst of the bush. So the fire site links to Yonaguni, and the exact calling verse placing divine calling before the collapse of the witness. So Yonaguni, the place of the burning bush, to Yonaguni, brings us out to Exodus 3:4 by means of measure. If we take the base angle between the Earth center radius line and Yana to Yonaguni's chord, we've got 59 degrees. 59 converted into arc minutes is 3540. In Exodus 3:5, there it says, "Put off thy shoes, this place is holy ground." If we measure the supplementary angle and the remaining Earth center angle to 180 degrees, we have a remainder of 118. So 118 converted into arc seconds is 424. Now Deuteronomy 4:24, that speaks, "For the Lord thy God is consuming fire." So it identifies the flame theme as divine fire not merely a natural burning place. So now we have a bearing of Yonaguni to Yonaguni, which is a measured clockwise from true north at 80 degrees, 0.7075. If you convert that to arc minutes, we get 4842. In Exodus 4:2, there it speaks of, "What is that in thy hand?" And he said, "A rod." The rod sign begins at Moses calling and leads to the hand, the rod command that divides the sea. We have a measurement here of Yanar to Dwarka, which is a triangular perimeter of 8,333 nautical miles. That can be converted to 784. Now, the Hebrew number 784 is fire. We also have, as mentioned earlier, Yonaguni half central angle of 0.54 rads. So 54 and 784 is rod and fire. Yonaguni to Dwarka, there is a raw distance of 2,710, which converts to fingers of 142. In Exodus 14:22, there it speaks of the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea. We have a rival azimuth at Dwarka and Yonaguni route. The rival azimuth are at Dwarka from the Yonaguni route is 142.87 degrees clockwise from true north. Again, brings us to Exodus 14:29. Israel walked upon dry land, and the waters were a wall. Yonaguni to Yonaguni is 6,904 kilometers. If you convert that to common cubits, it's 15,102. In Exodus 15:10, there it speaks of the sea covered them, they sank as lead in the mighty waters. So Yanar to Yonaguni distance joins the burning bush beginning to Yonaguni's sinking judgment end. We have a supplementary angle remaining Earth center angle at 180 degrees for Yonaguni to Dwarka. Brings us out to 24.3951 degrees. And that difference is 15.5 degrees. And again, Exodus 15:5 speaks of the depth that covered them and they sank to the bottom as stone. 267, again, further support for the chariot, and H68 stone. We have a final register sum up of the strongest alignments with Yonaguni as the burning bush, God calls, Moses' ascent and his rod, Dwarka as the dry path, Yonaguni the stone or lead singing. Here's a summary of all our measurements. I hope I remembered to include them all, but some I may not have. So here is a roundup. G2666 is to swallow up, drown. Now we also have the surface area between the triangle at the Earth center, Yonaguni, and the actual place where Moses parted the sea has a raw percentage of 15.5%. Again, brings us to Exodus 15:5. If we add three sides of the center triangle after converting them to common cubits, we get 35960 common cubits. 359 may bring us to the Greek number 3584, which is Strong's. So G3584 means dry ground, dry land. The Sagitta between Yonaguni and Belar has a raw value of 1,431 kilometers. 1431 brings us to Exodus 14:31. This is this passage. This is the passage. So it completes the aftermath. Israel sees the Lord's great work. We also have a Yonaguni to Mount Sinai surplus of 1421, 566 common cubits, bringing us to the passage 1421 in Exodus. So returns to Sinai route to opening mount. Moses stretches out his hand and the Lord divides the sea. We also have a Tula to Mount Sinai surplus percent, which reads 154. So Exodus 15:4 again is part of the Pharaoh's chariots and host. So it fits the collapse and the victory song stage. We also have a measurement here of a chord distance and chord arc share. So 398 LVS in Exodus. So they all rejoice and sing a song, the salvation on the shore. So we have a surface arc and one arc share percentage brings us to 13.384%. 384 using LVS brings us to Exodus 14:27. So the moment the sea returns to strength, the start of the collapse again against the pursuers. We also have an Yonaguni to Easter chord share of the Earth's diameter of 91.72%. 1721 using LVS brings us to Psalm 106:9, which adds a later Red Sea memory. God rebukes the Red Sea, dries it, and leads his people through the depths. We have a Easter Island to Tula bearing of 192 degrees. The 1920th passage in the Bible is Exodus 14:30, where it speaks of the sea event. Israel is saved and sees the Egyptians dead upon the shore. Easter Island to Tula has a 117 field, which is a bearing, and 1171 LVS in the book of Psalms brings us to Psalm 77:17, where it speaks of stormy water memory behind the sea path. Clouds poured, water and deep responds. We have a Tula to Yonaguni arc minus chord surplus of 2272506. 2272 using LVS in the book of Psalms brings us to Psalm 136:15, where it summarizes Pharaoh and his host being overthrown in the Red Sea. We also have a Yonaguni to Easter Island sea island route of 133 degrees. 133 and 384 brings us using LVS method to Exodus 14:27. So Pacific Witness route supports sea return and judgment after the safe passage. We have a Yonaguni primary orientation line, 157 degrees. 158 brings us to Exodus 15:8, which is the orientation line strengthens the victory song. Overthrown the enemy, waters gathered and the depths concealed. The orientation we have spoken about earlier, but also if you measure it in rads, we get 274. Genesis 7:4. This is another flood supporting layer and water judgment regarding Noah's flood and sea event. We have a Yonaguni return direction lane of 270 degrees. 27 matches Exodus 14:27, where there is a directional water cue. The sea returns to strength after Moses stretches out his hand. We have a Great Bitter to North Pole arc, 3584 nautical miles. 3584 Greek Strong's is dry land. Here is our measurement of 2666, which Greek number to swallow up, drown. We have a Great Bitter to Yonaguni initial azimuth triangle angle of 4,100 arc minutes. 4100 is the Greek Strong's number to believe and have faith. And this is what the Lord and his servant Moses spoke to the Israelites about. We have an apothegm geometry as 17, so 3067 miles brings us to 3068. 3068 is Yahweh, God. So God's name is printed into his work. We also have a latitude to degrees, minutes, seconds, and we add DMS. The repeated 81 is language fields. We got 81. So 81 is to sink and drown. Hebrew, H81 means to sink and drown. We also have a latitude difference. Compare Yonaguni to Balar latitudes. If we compare the latitudes, we end up with 64. 64 is the Hebrew number for stretch out. And God said, Moses, stretch out your hand. Then we have a submerged depth sea cover. So the actual underwater depth in royal cubits is 49.6. So it calculates to 85 feet. So 50 and 85 using Hebrew gematria is sea and cover. We have a North Pole arc distance from Yonaguni. It measures 7,291 kilometers. The Hebrew number H7291 is pursue or chase. We have a long arc minus the short arc route measurement of 5,777,187 rods. The Hebrew number H5777 using Strong's is to lead. Lead. H5777 is the Hebrew number for the word lead, and they sank like lead. We also have a measurement here, the sector area from the diagram expressed in square miles of 6749 square miles. 6749 in Hebrew Strong's is to sink or plunge. The Dwarka meridian short arc in yards is 13,619,173 yards. 7307 is the Hebrew Strong's number for wind and spirit, and it was God that threw up the easterly wind to part the sea. Then we have Dwarka to Yonaguni surplus in nautical miles. The leading is 90.76 nautical miles. 907 is the Greek number baptize or immerse or dunk into water. We also have a sector perimeter in feet, which is 59809,110 feet. Now 598 is the Greek isopophy number for cloud, and it was a cloud during the day that guided and led the Israelites through the wilderness. Dwarka to Yonaguni azimuth is 76.24 degrees. 76 is servant, and Moses was the Lord's servant. The Wave Rock Protected Area Reserve is 160 hectares. 160 brings us to the passage directly with Exodus 15:16. And it speaks of the enemies become still as stone until the people pass over. A strong, dry stone wall supports beside the seawall theme. So the 110 meters converts to 120 yards. Now, the Hebrew number 120 is Adam or man. So it adds a sink down echo to the wall object linking the open wall side with the collapsed wall. Then we have a rock curved wall length of 110 meters, which converts to 210 royal cubits. So 210 is crossing, passage. And there was a crossing and passage through where Moses parted the sea. Then we have a Bala to Qatar. We have Bala to the wave rock, which is exactly 10,000 kilometers. So 10,000 supports this large-scale precision of the wave rock lane, outranking 120 bearing and 22 rod wall. Bala to the wave rock, arc minus chord surplus, is 1498 kilometers. It could be rounded to 1500. Again, Exodus 15. So what we've learned from this study is that Exodus 15 is a big part of the sea parting story, whereas we did not pick that up in the Easter Island, seeing so many measurements of 15, 15, 15. Now, we found 88 and 8,000 and 888 in the other studies related to this series of studies. And we find it here again between Dwarka and Bala in nautical miles. And Dwarka to the actual place where Moses parted the sea in perimeter of 88.77 nautical miles. So again, it leads us to Genesis 8:8 and the ark water support. So 8:8 and 888 has been seen before in these studies, so I thought I'd include a roundup of where we see it again in this study. Now, the first time I did this BTI test score, I got 88%, but then I added a few extra parts like the orientation of the block, the Yonaguni block. And finally, I got a score of 91.2%. Now, that's extremely difficult. I've also upgraded the BTI test to 3.3, which now includes an instruction to create this page and include a sum of all the measurements taken. So I'm quite proud of this score. It's very difficult to get anything over 5%. So without you doing and finding so many alignments like I have, you will not get a score as high as this. So in these series of my videos on YouTube, what we got is the video 7A is Göbekli Tepe. That speaks of Noah and the flood. Then we got 7B, which is Easter Island, which speaks of the manna and the law given to Moses. Then we got 7C is Tula, Mexico, which is all about the Ark and the Jericho story. Then we got 7D, which is this one, Yonaguni and Dwarka, which is the parting of the sea and the sinking of stone. So where to next? That's a good question. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please take care and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.